highest planet, which is known as Brahmaloka. He becomes fully developed in consciousness. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Anyone engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as a devotee. But there is a distinction between pure devotees and mixed devotees. A mixed devotee engages in devotional service for the spiritual benefit of being eternally engaged in the transcendental abode of the Lord in full bliss and knowledge. In material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects, let me read that again in 1 minute. A mixed devotee engages in devotional service of the Lord in full bliss and knowledge. In material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. The highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavana. They are not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. That platform of love is the pure state of devotional service. Unless one is advanced to this pure state of devotional service, there is a tendency to desire elevation to a higher material position. A mixed devotee may desire to enjoy a comfortable life on another planet with a greater span of life, such as on Brahmaloka. These are material desires. But because a mixed devotee engages in the service of the Lord, ultimately, after many, many lives of material enjoyment, he undoubtedly develops Krishna consciousness. And the symptom of this Krishna consciousness is that he is no longer interested in any sort of materially elevated life. He does not even aspire to become a personality like Lord Brahma. Wow. Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Okay, so I'll read this verse again. When a person thus engages in devotional service and self-realization for many, many years and births, he becomes completely reluctant to enjoy any one of the material planets, even up to the highest planet, which is known as Brahmaloka. He becomes fully developed in consciousness. Okay, so in this purport, it talks about what is a mixed devotee in devotional service. And what is a pure devotee? So, what's very good is that Srila Prabhupada doesn't mince his words, and he gives a full explanation of what it means to be a pure devotee and what it means to be a mixed devotee. Understanding these distinctions is very important if we want to have a progressive spiritual life. Progressive spiritual life means that we're going to make regular spiritual advancement. We're not satisfied being on a level of, let's say, self satisfaction of mixed devotional service. We want to go to the highest level of pure devotional service, which means that there's pure love for Krishna. So one can mechanically engage in devotional service, or one can engage in devotional service with actual love and devotion. That's the difference between a mixed devotee that Prabhupada explains here and a pure devotee. Prabhupada says there's a distinction between pure devotees and mixed devotees. A mixed devotee engages in devotional service for the spiritual benefit of being eternally engaged in the transcendental abode of the Lord in full bliss and knowledge. In material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. Okay, well, that's a very profound statement. And his one interest, which is talking about pure devotee, is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. Now, Prabhupada gives an example. The highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavana. They are not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. That platform of love is the pure state of devotional service. Unless one is advanced to this pure state of devotional service, there is a tendency to desire elevation to a higher material position. A mixed devotee may desire to enjoy a comfortable life on another planet with a greater span of life, such as on Brahmaloka. These are material desires, but because a mixed devotee engages in the service of the Lord, ultimately, after many, many lives of material enjoyment, he undoubtedly develops Krishna consciousness. And the symptom of this Krishna consciousness is that he is no longer interested in any sort of materially elevated life. He does not even aspire to become a personality like Lord Brahma. Okay, so what is Prabhupada doing here? He is not what he is doing, but what actually this verse is all about. He's explaining, or this verse is explaining the difference between a pure devotee and a mixed devotee. So, to go from being a mixed devotee to a pure devotee is not easy. It requires a long period of devotional service and actually purifying one's motive of being Krishna conscious. So this can be possible only when one is in association of pure devotees. If one does not associate with pure devotees, it's going to be very difficult to attain such a level of, let's say, purity. So, surrender not only to the spiritual master, but also to always uh, being on the top level of Krishna consciousness, not having any material goals in life, only being completely satisfied with engaging in devotional service that is beneficial not only to oneself but to everyone that one comes in contact with, and to not have any more, uh, let's say, prejudices. Oh, I like this person. I don't like that person. The devotee is no longer, a pure devotee is no longer has any prejudice. He is equally merciful to everyone, to the devotee, to the non-devotee, etc. But he has special attention for the genuine devotees. But still, he does not ignore the non-devotees in the sense that if they're willing to listen and willing to take part in devotional service, he will do everything he can to help them. Okay, so here it says, uh, a mixed devotee engages in devotional service for the spiritual benefit of being eternally engaged in the transcendental abode of the Lord in full bliss and knowledge. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, that sounds like why is it a mixed devotee if he's engages in devotional service for the spiritual benefit of being eternally engaged in the transcendental abode of the Lord in full bliss and knowledge? Well, uh, and right after that, Prabhupada starts talking about in material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. This is a major statement by Prabhupada. In other words, this separates the real devotee from the occasional devotee or from the mixed devotees. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. The highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavana. They are not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. That platform of love is the pure state of devotional service. Unless one is advanced to this pure state of devotional service, there is a tendency to desire elevation to a higher material position. A mixed devotee may desire to enjoy a comfortable life on another planet with a greater span of life, such as on Brahmaloka. These are material desires. But because a mixed devotee engages in the service of the Lord. Ultimately, after many, many lives of material enjoyment, he undoubtedly develops Krishna consciousness, and the symptom of this Krishna consciousness is that he is no longer interested in any sort of materially elevated life. He does not even aspire to become a personality like Lord Brahma. Okay, so this is an explanation of a pure devotee and pure devotional service. Now, are we coming to that level? Well, that level would require complete surrender to spiritual master and Krishna. And that's why it says the highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavana. Now, to come to the level of the gopis in Vrindavana, it's not going to happen right away. It would require a long, long period of devotional service without any fall down, without any material, let's say, desires, etc. So there are mixed devotees. Mixed devotee, Prabhupada gives the example of mixed devotee. Mixed devotee engages in devotional service for the spiritual benefit of being eternally engaged in the transcendental abode of the Lord in full bliss and knowledge. Okay, but that's a mixed devotee. Now, then Prabhupada switches and he says, in material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement and knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he spontaneously engages in satisfying it. Okay, now that's a very, very, very profound statement by Prabhupada. And he explains here what is the symptom of a pure devotee. There are many devotees, but a pure devotee is very special, and he differentiates. That's the next thing he says is the highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavana. Well, the gopis in Vrindavana were not big scholars. They were simple cowherd girls. They would take care of cows. They would take care of their family. They were not great scholars or pundits, but they had pure, unalloyed love for Krishna. As opposed to their husband. At one time, Krishna was hungry, and he asked the cowherd boys to go and see the cowherd men because Krishna was hungry. And so when they did that, what Krishna told them, don't be surprised if they refuse to give you food. So the cowherd boys went, and because the men were afraid of Kamsa, when they knew that the boys were coming to get some prasadam for Krishna, and of course Kamsa is the enemy of Krishna, and they were afraid of him, they refused to give the boys any prasadam. And when they came back and they told that to Krishna, he said, "Well, now go to the gopis, asks them." And as soon as they went to the gopis, gopis immediately said, "Yes, not only will we give prasadam to Krishna, but we want to go and take the prasadam ourselves and give it directly to Krishna." So they were not afraid of Kamsa. They were not afraid of anything. They just had pure love for Krishna. So they didn't even have time to be afraid of someone. They would immediately, to please Krishna, they went personally and brought the prasadam to him and made sure that he was completely satisfied. So here Prabhupada says that in material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. In other words, he doesn't become like a pundit and tries to understand as much as he can about who the Lord is and all different nuances of knowledge of the Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. How can you understand the Supreme Lord? You can try, but the Supreme Lord is transcendental and infinitely great. So it's impossible to understand the Supreme Lord completely. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. So that word spontaneously is very important. Let's look it up. What's the definition of spontaneous? See, when Krishna asked the gopis to go and ask uh, the gopas, or the men, to give the Krishna give prasadam for Krishna, they refused because they were afraid of Kamsa. But when then Krishna asked, "Okay, now go see the gopis and ask them." Immediately they said, "Yes, and we'll bring the prasadam ourselves. We want to see Krishna." Well, afterwards, the gopas, they felt uh, embarrassed. Well, our wives are more advanced spiritually than we are, you see, because they didn't hesitate. The wives didn't hesitate at all, and they were not afraid of Kamsa. They didn't care about Kamsa. They were completely enamored by Krishna. So uh, when a person is transcendental to these conditions, he's called a pure devotee. Well, what are those conditions? That is, in material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. So the pure devotee has unalloyed love for Krishna, doesn't care to try and understand everything about Krishna. That, of course, is impossible. And Krishna is transcendental and he has infinite qualities. All he cares about is that he loves Krishna and he wants to purely serve the Lord without any motive other than to please the Lord. So then he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. So, the meaning is spontaneous. Look it up.
Maharaj, it means performed or occurring as a result of a sudden inner impulse or inclination and without premeditation or external stimulus.
Right. Without, oh, yeah, he spontaneously does it. In other words, he doesn't have to be told to do anything. He doesn't have to think twice of doing something. Just like uh, when the cowherd men were asked to give prasadam to Krishna, they were afraid of Kamsa, so they refused. But when the gopis were asked, right away they said yes. They didn't care about, you know, Kamsa or what he might do to them. So that's spontaneous. That's you do something without any hesitation. You don't start thinking about the merits and the demerits of doing something. And you're not afraid of doing something like serving Krishna. You just spontaneously do it. You don't ask any questions, or as they say sometimes, theirs is but to do or die. Theirs is not to ask why. Right. So the gopis did not ask, oh, why is Krishna hungry? Why is he asking us to do this? No, they spontaneously, as soon as they heard that Krishna was hungry, spontaneously they took the prasadam to him. They didn't even say, okay, well, you go, cowherd boys, you give it to Krishna. No, they said, we're going to come personally to give it to Krishna because they had full love for Krishna and they had no fear of Kamsa. Why? Because they know that Krishna will protect them. So why should they be afraid of Kamsa? So the highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavana. They are not interested in understanding Krishna. Well, how are you going to understand Krishna? You never come to an end of understanding Krishna because he has transcendental qualities and they're infinite. Actually, he's in the fourth dimension. What does it mean, fourth dimension? Well, we all live in three dimensions, Uh, that is, there is um, three dimensions means there's uh, um, anyway. The fourth dimension is when everything becomes eternal. The three dimensions is that we're still under the influence of materialism. So Uh, but when we come to the fourth dimension, then everything becomes eternal and is always expanding. Like the love of the devotees is always expanding for Krishna, and it's an eternal thing. So when the gopis dance with Krishna, ostensibly for one night, that night expands to millions of years. Now, that's hard to understand, but that is what it means that is the meaning of transcendental love. What should be a one night affair becomes an eternal experience. Now, to experience something like that, one would have to have complete love and devotion for Krishna. They're no longer living in three dimensions. They're living in the fourth dimension where everything becomes eternal. Okay, so in the material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. So, when the gopis were asked to bring prasadam to Krishna, as opposed to when the cowherd men were asked to do that, the cowherd men thought about it, and because they were fearful of Kamsa, they refused to do it. But when the gopis were asked, they didn't have any second thought. They didn't have to think, well, should I do this or should I not do this? They immediately, spontaneously prepared the prasadam and took it to Krishna. And that's what's being explained here. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, what conditions are talking about? That is, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord, one, in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, two, or advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, three, uh, and the living or knowledge to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. Four, when a person is transcendental to these conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him, meaning the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Now, you're not going to be able to achieve such a level overnight. It takes a long time to arrive at such a level of pure, spontaneous devotional service. But if one is regularly engaged in the devotional service of the Lord and eventually loses any material motive for serving the Lord, one can make very, let's say, quick advancement in Krishna consciousness and begin to come closer to the highest example of pure devotional service. What is the highest example of pure devotional service? It's the gopis in Vrindavan. They're not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. That platform of love is the pure state of devotional service. Unless one is advanced to this pure state of devotional service, there is a tendency to desire elevation into a higher material position. A mixed devotee may desire to enjoy a comfortable life on another planet with a greater span of life, such as on Brahmaloka. These are material desires. But because a mixed devotee engages in the service of the Lord, ultimately, after many, many lives of material enjoyment, he undoubtedly develops Krishna consciousness. And the symptom of this Krishna consciousness is that he is no longer interested in any sort of materially elevated life. He does not even aspire to become a personality like Lord Brahma. Yeah, is completely free of any material desires, and he is completely dedicated to pleasing the Lord. So one can be completely free from any material desires. But that's not enough. One has to be then completely dedicated to pleasing the Lord. So that was the position of the gopis. They were completely dedicated to pleasing the Lord. And when there was an opportunity to do that, they did not hesitate. Whereas their husbands, they hesitated. But the devotee never hesitates to please the Lord in any way possible that the Lord wants. Okay, so Prabhupada explains what is a mixed devotee, and then he explains also what is a pure devotee. The symptom of this Krishna consciousness is that he is no longer interested in any sort of materially elevated life. He does not even aspire to become a personality like Lord Brahma. Well, to attain such a position where you go from being a mixed devotee to a genuinely pure devotee, it means that you no longer have any interest of achieving any type of material sense gratification. The only purpose in life is to please Krishna and Guru. And you'll go to you'll do anything that is necessary to please the Guru and Krishna. Okay. So there are mixed devotees and there are pure devotees. So here Prabhupada is explaining in this purport what is a mixed devotee and what is a pure devotee. Canto 3, chapter 27, verse number 27. Okay, any questions? Okay, we'll go on to text number 28 and 29. Krishna says, my devotee actually becomes self-realized by my unlimited causeless mercy. And thus, when freed from all doubts, he steadily progresses toward his destined abode, which is directly under the protection of my spiritual energy of unadulterated bliss. That is the ultimate perfectional goal of the living entity. After giving up the present material body, the mystic devotee goes to that transcendental abode and never comes back. Wow. Let's read that again. My devotee actually becomes self-realized by my unlimited causeless mercy. That's a difficult thing to understand. He's saying my devotee actually becomes self-realized by my unlimited causeless mercy. And thus, when freed from all doubts, well, that's what it means when you become self-realized. you're free from all doubts. He steadily progresses towards this destined abode, which is directly under the protection of my spiritual energy of unadulterated bliss. So, practical examples of this, when Prabhupada was present and many devotees came in contact with Prabhupada, and they were on, many of the devotees were very highly, not all of them, but many of them were highly advanced, not advanced, but very intelligent. And if they never became Krishna conscious, they would have become very prominent in material life, you know. Uh, but they chose to give up, uh, becoming prominent in material life, and they chose to completely surrender to Srila Prabhupada and help him expand Krishna consciousness. I mean, that was a big decision, and many of their parents got upset because they had spent a lot of money, in the education of their child, and they were expecting a return that the child would become, a wealthy person, and they would, or at least a person that would be able to help them in their older when they got older and so forth. But when the devotees became when the child when the son or daughter became a devotee, now they were totally under the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. They're not interested in working, in a job to make money and to support their parents or to make their parents feel, proud that their son or daughter has become very prominent in the material life. They were just interested in pleasing Prabhupada and Krishna. So they were surprised and they were disappointed also because they were expecting, after spending so much money for educating, getting a good education to their son or daughter, now the son or daughter became Krishna conscious. I was no longer interested in mundane life. It was a shock for many parents. But uh, some of the parents eventually came to understand that actually this is good, that my son or daughter has become Krishna conscious and is following a person like Srila Prabhupada, a pure devotee, and they become satisfied. In the beginning, they were so doubtful and suspicious, but eventually they became very satisfied that their child grew up and became a devotee of Krishna. Some parents were never really satisfied because they had expectations. When they get old, their child will be, able to support them and this and that. Uh, well, it doesn't mean that when you become a devotee, you ignore your parents, and that's a big mistake. But you don't uh, completely forget about Krishna consciousness to take care of your parents. You find a level of, let's say, responsibility, especially if your parents are older and they're not, in good health or something. So you do have a responsibility to take care of them, but not to the point where you have no time for Krishna consciousness, right? So it's a balancing act. Let's put it like that. So the highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavana. They are not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. So a pundit will try and understand things, but the gopis, who are not, let's say, pundits, meaning having high education, they didn't care about understanding Krishna. They only cared about loving Krishna. But by loving Krishna, they developed transcendental qualities. So the gopis, they know how to uh, please Krishna by uh, singing for him and cooking for him. So they became transcendentally, uh, they developed transcendental qualities. So let's say singing for Krishna. Well, they didn't know like one raga or two ragas or 10 ragas. Like some famous singer will know maybe 10 or 20, maybe 50 ragas. And the gopis know thousands of ragas to please the Lord because they need to have they need to be able to express all their different uh, uh, like feelings of love for the Lord. They can't do that just with one raga, you know. So uh, the devotees may not be materially advanced, but they are spiritually advanced. That means they develop many transcendental qualities that are beyond the understanding of ordinary people. So, uh, and that's because of their pure love and devotion for the Lord and their desire to express it. So, therefore, they express that through chanting and through devotional service and so forth. So, we see that, someone joins Krishna consciousness. Let's say a girl joins Krishna consciousness, and she never learned how to cook because she was always involved in being academic and trying to get a good job or so forth. But now, when she becomes a devotee, she learns how to cook nicely for Krishna, how to sing nicely for Krishna, how to dress nicely for Krishna, how to do everything for Krishna, right? So she learns all these different arts. There's 64 transcendental art that are explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So a devotee will develop many of these arts to please the Lord. So uh, it's not that they become dumb by becoming a devotee. They become educated, but not in sense gratification, and how to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and through the instructions of the bona fide spiritual master. So there is education in Krishna consciousness, and there are higher and higher levels of this education. Therefore, here Prabhupada says the highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavan. Well, the gopis in Vrindavan were not scholars. They didn't even go to school. They were cowherd girls. What did they do? They were tending the cows. Now, usually someone who just takes care of cows is considered to be very lowly. They don't have a PhD. They don't they don't have riches and so forth. But the gopis, they had more than riches. They had more than knowledge. They had love for Krishna. That means that they were eternally liberated from birth, death, old age, and disease. That is real achievement. And they were completely surrendered to the Lord, meaning they would do anything that the Lord wanted without any hesitation. Okay, so that's why it says here the highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavan. They are not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. And that is a major statement. If you try to understand Krishna, well, you never get to the end because Krishna has infinite qualities. But you can love Krishna where you're not trying to understand or second guess Krishna in any way. You simply love him, and therefore you don't hesitate in doing whatever Krishna wants. Uh, whatever Krishna wants. Notice you're willing to do anything to please the Lord. So you'll do something that you never did before, and you'll now do something that you always did before. Right? So the highest example of pure devotional service is that of the gopis in Vrindavan. They're not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. That's a statement that we have to meditate on and think about. The gopis were not scholars. They just loved Krishna, and they did whatever Krishna wanted them to do. And they didn't ask, why should I do this? No, spontaneously did it out of love and devotion for the Lord. They are not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him. That platform of love is the pure state of devotional service. Unless one is advanced to this pure state of devotional service, there is a tendency to desire elevation to a higher material position. One example of this would be this one devotee named, what was his name? I forget his name right now. But this one devotee, he completely loved Srila Prabhupada. And at one point, his parents died, and he got a large amount of money. They left it for him. Well, when I say large amount of money, I don't know if it was in the Jayananda, yeah. It was not, yes, it was not in the millions, but it was in thousands, but it was a lot of money. So Jayananda gave a check of all the money that he got from his parents who died. And Prabhupada looked at the check and gave it back to Jayananda because Jayananda had a serious health problem that was, and Prabhupada said, look, you use this money to get yourself healed. And then Jayananda gave the money back to Prabhupada. He said, you can use it much better than I can. You please keep the money. That's the type of person he was. And of course, he did die of his disease, but he never hesitated in serving Srila Prabhupada right up to the end of his life. That's an exceptional devotee, right? And Prabhupada actually loved Jayananda very much. He would always ask, "Where's Jayananda?" So that was proof that Jayananda was one of the first devotees who actually had love and devotion for Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so therefore it says here that when one is not interested in understanding Krishna, but only in loving him, that platform of love is the pure state of devotional service. So an academic tries to understand things. A pure devotee is only interested in loving the Lord and pleasing the Lord by by trying to do anything that the Lord wants him or her to do. That platform of love is the pure state of devotional service. Unless one is advanced to this pure state of devotional service, there is a tendency to desire elevation to a higher material position. A mixed devotee may desire to enjoy a comfortable life on another planet with a greater span of life, such as on Brahmaloka. These are material desires, but because a mixed devotee engages in the service of the Lord Ultimately, after many, many lives of material enjoyment, he undoubtedly develops Krishna consciousness. And the symptom of this Krishna consciousness is that he is no longer interested in any sort of materially elevated life. He does not even aspire to become a personality like Lord Brahma. Well, that's a very high level, or that's the highest level of Krishna consciousness, when one is no longer interested in any type of material gain or advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. No, when a person is transcendental to these things, he's called a pure devotee. And the devotee is not engaged in devotional service for any type of material benefit or to try and understand the Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he spontaneously, that means without any second thought, without any hesitation at all, he spontaneously engages in satisfying the Lord. Okay, now to attain that level, like let's say Prabhupada came in touch with his spiritual master in 1922, but he didn't actually take sannyas until 1968 or 69. So there was a big number of years between him first coming in contact with Krishna consciousness and his guru, and actually completely giving up everything and engaging full time in Krishna consciousness. That's because he was just married. He had a child or two, and he felt, that he had a responsibility to take care of his family. But he always kept his guru in his mind, and he didn't take initiation right away. He waited, I think, 10 or 11 years before he took initiation after he met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And not so far after he got initiated, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur left his body. And now there's a long period where Prabhupada was married and working. But in 1959, I think it was, he actually gave everything up and became, and I think he was 59 years old, and he just gave everything up and became full-time in Krishna consciousness. So that's why it says here that when a person is transcendental to these conditions, he's called a pure devotee. Well, what are those conditions? In material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material misery, one, or he wants material gain, two, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of God and the living entity, three, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord, four. When a person is transcendental to these conditions, he's called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself. So it's like someone will say, well, I've come in contact with Krishna consciousness now, but let me work and make a lot of money, and then I'll surrender to the Lord. And I'll give all the money to the Lord, and I'll surrender to the Lord. That is basically uh, a a dangerous situation because you might become very attached to all the money you make and not really want to completely surrender to the Lord, after working so hard to make all that money. So it's there was someone, Jayananda Prabhu, he got a large amount of money when his parents died. and he had a very severe, sickness. But he gave the money to Prabhupada. Gave him a check, like it's $70,000 or something like that. And Prabhupada gave the check back. He said, "You use this to heal yourself." And then Jayananda gave it back to Prabhupada, and he said, "You can use this money much better than me." That's the type of person he was, right? He didn't try and heal his sickness. He simply wanted to serve Prabhupada, and he did right up to the point where he actually left his body. So he's considered to be the first devotee that actually attained pure love and devotion for Prabhupada and Krishna. He was a selfless person. He never tried to become prominent. He was always doing things like, taking the trash out, sometimes staying up very late, cleaning the temple. He would do all kinds of, what you would call ordinary things out of his love and devotion for Prabhupada and Krishna. And a very humble person. In fact, there's a book about him. You should, if you have that, I don't have that book, but you should read that book. You can get it. I'm sure you can buy that book and read about Jayananda because he was an exceptional devotee. Prabhupada loved him very much. He would always say, where is Jayananda? Because Jayananda would always be working. Everybody else would try and go and stop what they're doing and just hear Prabhupada's lecture. But if everybody stops doing things to hear the lecture, somebody else to do something, to cook or clean or whatever. So that was Jayananda. He was always doing something to serve. And and Prabhupada really had a lot of love for him. And he always ask, "Where's Jayananda?" Because he would always be doing something to maintain the temple. At one point, he was for a long period of time he was working outside to make money to support the temple. And sometimes he would hardly sleep because he had a job. And as soon as he would finish his job, he would do like clean the temple, cook, drive here, drive there. And sometimes he hardly slept. He was always engaged either in working to make money for the temple or serving. When devotees would be sleeping, he would still be cleaning the kitchen or doing this or doing that. That's the type of person he was. Okay, so there's a book about him. You should try and get that book, and we can read a little bit about his complete dedication to Prabhupada. Okay, are there any questions?
Yeah, there is a book. It's available on Amazon as well. It's called The Beautiful Life of Jayana Thakur.
Yeah, why don't we buy that book? We can read about Jayananda. I never met him because I was always in France and he was in the United States. But everybody knew him, knew about him. Uh, yeah, why don't we buy that book
Yeah.
and read about him? Haribol.
Very
Okay, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Rama Rama. Hare. Many devotees recognize that Jayananda was, let's say, one of the first devotees that actually became a pure devotee. And Prabhupada recognized him also. So when you get that book, you read about the amazing things that Jayananda did and the relationship that he had with Prabhupada, which was very profound. Haribol.
Just ordered.
You just ordered it?
Mm-hmm.
Haribo. It's good to read about devotees who are like completely dedicated to Prabhupada, sacrificed everything for him. Yeah. Okay, well, what is today's?
Yes.
We'll have a very good Sunday. And oh, that Sunday means you have plenty of time to chant Hare Krishna. So chant and be happy. Jai. Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare
Hare
Hare,
Rama,
Hare
Hare
Rama,
Rama,
Rama
Rama
Rama,
Rama, Hare. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to his devotees like Jayananda. I never had the pleasure of meeting Jayananda, but I can tell you one thing that happened. Uh, I was engaged in building the Rath Yatra cart one time, right?
Mm.
We had to, we had the cart, but you had to always, uh, do things to make it look better and so forth, because it was only used once a year, and the rest
Mm.
of the time it was somewhere, and you would always have to do something to, clean it up, or something might be broken on it, so forth. So I was working uh, with some devotees to get the Rathayatra cart ready. And some guy came, some man came with a bicycle, and he stopped and he looked at us and he said, "Where is Jayananda?" So um, I had to tell him, well, he left his body.
Mm.
I said, "Oh no, he was a pure devotee," he said. "This is an ordinary person, but he had some contact with Jayananda." He said, "Oh, he was pure, a pure devotee." And I'm so sorry to hear that he left his body. And he was actually very sincere. He was actually heartbroken because he had contact with Jayananda. He didn't become a devotee, but he had this real, intense respect of Jayananda.
Wow.
I was surprised because he was just like an ordinary guy. He had his hat on, his hat was backwards, and he was, his bicycle. But he had met Jayananda. He had actually helped him sometimes. The Jayananda would engage him doing some devotional service. So he had a, very, very high level respect for Jayananda. And that's the type of person Jayananda was. Anybody who met him, first of all, he would try and engage them in devotional service. And secondly, they had tremendous respect for him, not because he told them anything, but because they could see that he was completely surrendered to Srila Prabhupada, and always doing things that everybody else did not want to do. Right? Like take the trash out, like, clean the temple. He hardly slept. He was always engaged in service. Okay, Hare Krishna. So we'll get that book and read about it. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Ki Jai. Any comments online? Tomorrow, tonight, the temple. Hare
Haribo, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.